Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us this evening. On behalf of the Reading League New Hampshire, we are thrilled to have with us our special guest, Lisa Klein. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our Reading League New Hampshire board members. We have Carol Tolman and Heidi Zollman, our co-presidents, Teresa Starkey and Bonnie Bell, our co-vice presidents, Holly Sturgill, our treasurer, Sherry McManus, our secretary, and other board members include Liz Cannon, Danielle Cullinan, Diane Meelan, Kristen Waddell, and myself, Debbie Dubriel. We are fortunate today to have Lisa joining us. Lisa, as an experienced educator with a passion for literacy, has served as a classroom teacher, a literacy trainer, a reading specialist, and professional development provider. Lisa began teaching in 1995 at the Landmark School, a school renowned for its work with children and adolescents with language and language-based learning disabilities. In her current role, Lisa appreciates the opportunity to collaborate with districts and school leadership, implementing consistent literacy routines across subjects and grade levels. Additionally, she is a frequent presenter at literacy conferences. Currently, Ms. Klein holds the position of Vice President, Senior Director of Account Management for Keys for Literacy. So without further ado, we welcome Lisa.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to just share my screen here. So let me just do that. Everybody see it okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, we have a jam-packed hour today because what we're going to be talking about is so important, writing instruction. And I want to be able to just do really quick chat in the chat. If you could just introduce yourself, tell us where you're from and what your position is. And as we're doing that, I'm just going to jump right in and get started. Okay. So welcome. As we're thinking about science of reading and about structured literacy, sort of this big battleship that is moving forward, and we're getting everybody going in the same direction, which is really important. What we also know, though, is, can you see this little dinghy over here? That's writing instruction. And so what we really want to do is talk about both reading and writing and how we can use direct explicit instruction, how we can use research to help support writing instruction for all of our students across New Hampshire. And Debbie didn't mention it, but I am from New Hampshire. I'm from Hudson, New Hampshire. And currently I live in Nashua, New Hampshire, and I have 3 children who have all been part of the public schools here. So this work is really meaningful to me, in addition to the work that I do for Keys to Literacy. Okay. So as we're thinking about our time together in this 1 hour, right, I want you to think about what we share. Does this validate some practice for you? Does it give you some ideas of how you might refine some of your writing instructional practices? Might you replace some new ideas with maybe some outdated ideas that aren't as evidence-based? And then maybe introduce you to some new things that you haven't considered yet in your practice. And ultimately, we want to use this time to collaborate with one another. And I know this is one in a series of many workshops and webinars that the Reading League New Hampshire is going to be offering to all of its members. And so use this as your time to make connections with others that you see in the chat who may be doing things similar to you. Okay. We know that our goal is to think about what is this current research, and then how can we really put it into practice with our classroom application, which is most important, right? How do we reach our students? All right, so I want to focus today on these 2 different IES research guides. So IES is Institute of Educational Science, and we have these in the chat for you. They're open source, so everyone can access them. The first one is Teaching Elementary School Students to be Effective Writers. And the second is Teaching Secondary Students to Write Effectively. So both of these IES reports and guides are really helpful for teachers. When you go in, what you're going to see is you can read the entire report. They also have some short video clips that you can watch. And then they also talk about, okay, what are some practical ideas or suggestions for making this work? So some of you might be in a position where you are a reading specialist or a literacy coach. You're not on mute. Let's just see here. There we go. Um, a position where you might be leading grade level discussions or faculty meetings. These IES guides are a really nice way, bit by bit, to just take a little bit from each of them and bring them forward to your colleagues to be able to start conversation around writing instruction. So just by show of hands, thanks to those of you who have your cameras on, I appreciate it. Show of hands, how many of you had a methods course in how to teach writing? I know. Look. So, yeah, that's right, Kristen. So not a lot of people had a methods course in how to teach writing. So what we want to think about is how can we find ways to bring this to your colleagues' attention or to your own attention so that you can help build up your students in their writing. Okay. So we're just going to look at each one of these reports, and I want to just give you the highlights. So in teaching elementary students to be effective writers, there were 4 key recommendations. Okay. Recommendation number 1, you have to find time for your kids to write every day. What they recommend is starting in first grade, it's about an hour. Now, it doesn't mean that for an hour your first graders are sitting quietly and writing on their own. What it means is there's going to be some direct explicit instruction, and throughout the day, there'll be multiple opportunities for them to write. Okay. The next recommendation, we need to teach students to use the writing process for a variety of reasons. What students think is the writing process equals what I have done wrong and finding all my mistakes. We want to change that for our students so that when they're thinking about writing process, they're thinking that they, as the writer, have a message that they want to convey to their audience. And the writing process helps us to refine that message so that it gets conveyed in the way that is most effective for our reader to understand what it is that we have to say. Okay, great. Just, there we go. The third recommendation, how do we teach students to become fluent? So they need automaticity with these things that are listed: handwriting, spelling, sentence construction, typing, word processing, right? And we know that when they have that automaticity, that fluency, it means that their working memory can be focused on a larger composition of thought. If I'm focused on how do I form this letter or spell this word, it's very difficult to keep track of the larger idea that I'm looking to share, right? And then the fourth recommendation, we need to create an engaged community of writers. When we're thinking about this, it's not just a feel-good principle. This is actually grounded in the research that we need to build this community of writers. And essentially, when you're thinking about that, if you think about writing something, and let's just say, for example, I were to ask you to unmute your mic, turn on your camera, and read something you wrote recently, you might feel a little apprehensive about that, right? Sharing your writing is a risk. And so what we want to do is we want to build communities where I, as the teacher, as the leader in that community, am sharing my writing and I'm making mistakes. I'm showing writing as an authentic process, right? And that I'm allowing my students opportunities to share without it being about just the spelling errors or the grammatical errors that they might be making, right? So we need to build that engaged community of writers. So these are the 4 key recommendations that come out of the IES report for elementary students. Let's look at the recommendations now for the secondary students, okay? In this instance, there are 3 key recommendations. When we're thinking about the secondary students, we know secondary adolescent literacy is typically grades either 4 or 5 or 6 through 12, right? So it includes the upper elementary and then those middle and high school years. First recommendation, we need to explicitly teach these writing strategies using what they call model, practice, reflect. Some of you might be familiar with this as the I do, we do, you do model, where we are showing them how to use writing process, how to use writing strategies. We're offering opportunities for students at different levels as they're using those strategies. Okay. Recommendation number 2 for secondary is that we really want to integrate writing and reading to emphasize key writing features. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about this, but essentially, starting in the elementary grades, we actually want to teach our students to read like writers. And when you read like a writer, you are noticing how different texts are built, what moves different writers make. And we're going to think about how using those reading those key features will help both in comprehension as well as written expression. Okay. The third finding at the secondary level is that we need to use assessments of student writing to inform both instruction and feedback. How many of you would just raise your hand if you are working in the secondary space? Okay. You know that secondary assessment often equals state testing, right? So we need to think more broadly about that. We need to think about what kind of formative assessments could we be doing through summary writing, for example, where we can get a sense of both what the writing needs are of our students as well as the comprehension needs of our students, okay? So in a nutshell, those are the recommendations at each of those IES reports. And now I just want to dig a little bit deeper into them. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody of this gradual release of responsibility model. And when we're thinking about this from Pearson and Gallagher, what we're thinking about is we know there needs to be direct, explicit instruction from the teacher, right? There needs to be this guided practice, this opportunity for kids to be either whole group, small group, some sort of collaborative time where they are afforded opportunity for oral rehearsal so that they have the opportunity to use the vocabulary and the concepts that go along with whatever the content is before we have them go independently to use this. We also know what research tells us is that we need explicit instruction of both skills and strategies to support them as writers, okay? Now, let's talk a little bit about this very, very important reading writing connection so that we don't have one huge battleship and one tiny dinghy here. How can we pull these two together, okay? When we're thinking about this, we're going to kind of embed this in that second recommendation, right? But what we know is that reading and writing float on a sea of talk. The oral language component is enormous in their ability, students' ability to write. We also know, Shanahan and Fitzgerald say that reading and writing are two cognitive processes that essentially draw from the same well. Okay. And many of you are probably very familiar with Scarborough's rope here, right? And when we look at that Scarborough's rope, we think about each of these strands and how each strand plays an important role in having proficient readers. We also think about how we're looking for students to become more proficient in each of these, and then we combine them all together. Similarly to Scarborough's rope, you may have seen the visual for the writing rope from Joan Sedita. And here, the idea was to create a visual so that when we talk about writing instruction, teachers would know what are all of the components of writing instruction that we need to be considering. And so here, as we're thinking about this writing rope, we think about those recommendations. Each of the strands, so here they're transcription, writing craft, text structure, syntax, and critical thinking. We think about what kind of parallels can we draw there between what we see in the reading rope and what we see in the writing rope. And when we can show these parallels, it helps for educators not to feel like I do reading time here, I do writing time here, right? Or I'm the science teacher, they do writing and ELA. How can we bring these together so that they can act in a reciprocal way to help boost both comprehension and written expression of whatever that content is, okay? Now, what I mentioned earlier is having your students read like writers. And when we're reading like writers, we are reading to learn more about how to build good writing. We're looking at the text structure, thinking about how that piece of writing was built. Why would a writer choose specific words that they choose, right? How we can think about just a single part of a text or the whole text. And I want you to think about, for those of you who are in the elementary grades, as you are reading any different piece with your students, think about what that text structure is. Think about identifying, we're reading an informational piece. This is for science. We're going to notice that this is built main ideas and details. When it's our turn to write informational text, guess what we need to do? We need to make sure that we have paragraphs that have strong main ideas, and all of the details that are in the paragraphs that we write need to be connected to that main idea. So again, it's not seen like I read here and I write here and they're not connected. We really want to help students know and understand how to read like a writer. Okay. Now, as we think about the secondary space, right, and we make that change into writing to learn and writing from sources, we want to think about how when students write about what they're reading, it boosts their comprehension, right? It helps them have multiple exposures to the vocabulary and the content. And then we're thinking about opportunities for them to write in science, in social studies, in history, in whatever classes that they're in, as a way to boost the reading and writing. Because there's a lot of text on here, so I'll just consolidate for you. Writing is thinking, right? And we use writing as a way to make connections, to clarify, to think about relationships. We know that the brain craves connections. We see this when people go into fMRIs and what parts of the brain light up when they're reading and writing, right? And what we know is we want to take this new information and connect it to information that already exists. And the act of writing helps us to do that. It helps us to build those relationships, helps us to connect ideas. On the website at keystoliteracy.com, we have free resources that you can download, and this is one of those pieces, because I see some people writing really fast. You can get this on the website, okay? Now, when we think about writing from sources, right, and a source could be anything that's read, said, or done, when you are writing about a source, you really have to think of this equation, and that equation is you have to have strong comprehension skills of whatever's read, said, or done. So you listen to a podcast, you watch a video, you read an article, you have to have solid comprehension of that information. Plus, you need proficient writing skills. How do you pull your ideas together? Do you have solid sentence construction? Is the text structure appropriate for whatever it is you're writing about? Together, that's how we get into these quality written responses, okay? When we think about writing process, and I'm going to show you some slides for that in a little bit, but essentially when you're starting in the writing process, your thinking and planning stages are really about the comprehension of those sources plus the writing skills. when we're in the write stage and the revising stage, that's when we're really honing those multiple writing skills that pull from the different strands of the writing rope. I put this slide in here just to say, what does this look like in my classroom tomorrow? Let me show you. These are the kinds of skills that your students will need to be able to write effectively about sources. They need to understand, how do you annotate text sources? What's important, what's not, right? And that leans into their comprehension, their main ideas. Thinking about, how do you gather information from multiple print and digital sources? We use 2-column notes as our way to have kids do that, because we know it's too much to hold in working memory, all of these ideas. So the 2-column note becomes a way for them to do that. Then we have to think about, all right, how are you going to organize this information effectively so that you have an introduction, a body that develops the ideas, and a conclusion that pulls it together for your reader? It also is about, how do you revise? And again, not to just find all of your mistakes, but how are you revising so that the message that you are trying to convey to your reader comes across in a very clear and concise way? Okay. All right, so let's look at, that was the reading writing connection. Let's look at this provide daily time to have students write. As I mentioned, basically what the IES report guide says is that they are recommending 60 minutes a day. Okay. So when you're thinking about the 60 minutes a day, what you want to be thinking about is, okay, in the elementary space, how can we break that apart so that there is direct explicit instruction? We're thinking about that gradual release of responsibility, right? But then how can we get 30 additional minutes of practice time for them? Maybe they write 10 minutes in science, 10 more in social studies, 10 more in math, right? So that there's multiple opportunities for them to be engaging with writing. And that's one of the biggest takeaways that I hope you get from our session together, which is, find the little opportunities for your kids to write more every single day. Because it's like what research tells us about exercise or about learning something new, that rather than spending 60 minutes once a week, if you can do it for 10 minutes 6 times, that is really where you build that muscle memory. Okay. I want to talk a little bit, for those of you who are at the secondary space, about, well, how can I do this in my history class? How do I get this in AP Bio? How do I do this in whatever course you might be teaching? I want to lean into quick writes. So when we're thinking about quick writes, what I want you to think about are short, informal times for your students to be able to write. And they're really like a foot in the door, particularly for those students who struggle with writing. And so, as I told you, teaching at the Landmark School and then having my own children, one of whom really struggles with writing, is dyslexic, so it's like his Achilles heel, that anything over 2 sentences can feel like I'm never going to be able to do that. The quick write allows us to fold those students in a low stakes opportunity for them to engage in writing. Okay. These can be done frequently. They're really easy. They help us to better remember and organize, right, and synthesize those ideas. And it's like taking the temperature of your class when you do a quick write. You can easily do something like do an exit ticket at the end of class. What were the 3 big takeaways that you got out of today's lesson? You can then read those. You don't have to grade them, but you can read them and make a couple of piles. Students who got it, students that I need to revisit this with, or maybe you even say, looks like I need to do a little reteach tomorrow on that. What I thought I was getting across, I can see now from this informal assessment of these exit tickets, I need to go back to the drawing board and try to reteach this a little bit. Okay. They can be used anytime in a lesson, beginning, middle, end, however you'd like to use them. Okay. So I want to show you some examples of quick writes in the primary space. When we say quick writes, you notice we've got our quotation marks because we know in kindergarten, not a lot happens quick. So we want to think about, right? We want to think about how this looks on a progression K to 12. So these are some examples of quick writes, right? Here's a vocabulary example. Here's some practicing of handwriting with our names. Here's some practicing of just letters or words or a sentence. Here's a book note. I love this one. Look, interesting. Page 10. Okay. And here's a couple of quick post-it notes. Here's a cloze activity for science, and then here's some labeling in math. As we think about this in the secondary space, right? There are many different examples of quick writes that you can use, and I really want to emphasize we can use these in math, in science, in history, across content areas as a way for kids to better process the content and the information. And for those of you who are in the secondary space, you know that sometimes it can be very difficult if I see 90 students in a day to think about grading 90 papers several times a week. So here, what I want to think about instead is how can we maybe use these quick writes and not have to grade them necessarily, but find other productive ways, such as sharing with one another, or the teacher randomly picks 3 that we're going to share today. So there's some investment in students to get them done, but also not feeling like everything has to be graded, because students do need opportunities to write without having the pressure of being graded as well. Okay. All right. Let's talk about writing process. I know I'm going through really fast. That's the problem with webinar, is that I just have so much I have to share with you. So hopefully you're taking good notes of things that you want to talk about. And if we finish a few minutes early, we can take some questions. But let's talk a little bit about this second recommendation in the IES report on elementary students. Remember, teach them to use the writing process for a variety of purposes. And then I want to draw your attention to that first recommendation that we talked about in the secondary report as well, which is you have to teach them how to use the writing process to their advantage. Okay. So this sits in that critical thinking strand of the writing rope, where when we are using writing process, we're really pulling all of these ideas together to, again, get our message out to our reader. One important piece that I want to highlight for you as a life skill, not just as an academic skill, is the idea of students understanding task, audience, and purpose. When we think about task, audience, and purpose, and this was in Common Core Writing Standard number 4, but when you're thinking about task, audience, and purpose, it is a life skill, right? And I told you I have these 20-year-old boys now who are out in the world, and I'm always reminding them, who's your audience, right? Read your room. That's really important. When we think about task, audience, and purpose, I want you to be thinking about how does that influence decisions that writers make, right? So for example, if I were to say to you right now, okay, everybody, take out your phone and write an email about how the workshop is going. What might be your first question to me? Anyone want to put it in chat or unmute? If I ask you to write an email about how this session is going, what might you want to know?
To who?
Correct. Why? If you're writing it to your spouse, might you use different words to describe how it's going versus if you're writing it to the superintendent?
Right.
Yeah, of course you would, right? So what we want our students to know is that good writers write with their audience in mind. And what that means is you make really important decisions about how you're going to structure it, the vocabulary that you're going to use, right? And this is how we make the connection for our students to think about writing goes beyond just an assignment in the classroom. Writing is a skill that you want to have throughout your entire lifetime, and that it's actually an important way for you to present to people who don't necessarily know you. So when my boys were in second grade, they had great second grade teachers, and they studied the Iditarod races. And so they wrote letters to these mushers that drive the carts. And one of the mushers wrote back, and it was like a form letter, Dear blank. And the guy wrote Ben. That's my son's name, Dear Ben, right? Ben hung this thing over his bed for the longest time because someone famous in Alaska, now he probably lived in a woodshed, right? But he was some famous guy, wrote to Ben. His voice was heard outside of just our family or his school environment. That's a really important lesson for students, and that's how we help them understand the relevance of writing to their life. And what we want to say is sometimes kids want to use text talk, right? And so was interviewing people for a babysitter for my daughter when she was younger. There's, Rivier College is right here in Nashua. So I put up a poster at Rivier and said, I'm looking for a babysitter. And I was getting text messages from people that I was interviewing saying, going to be L8, like going to be late. Like, no, not to a potential employer. Is it okay if that's the text message to your best friend? Is it okay if it's a text message to your mom? Maybe, I don't know, but not okay. And what I thought of when these college kids were consecutively texting me in text talk was they don't understand task, audience, and purpose. They probably didn't receive direct explicit instruction on. It's not to say that that text message is bad. It's not. It really does depend on your task, audience, and purpose. So I draw your attention, spend a little extra time on this slide because I feel like it's a way that we can help engage our students, even our reluctant writers, to help them understand the power that's in their voice, and that they really want to make sure that they're honing that voice based on their task, audience, and purpose. Okay, so because both of those research IES guides recommend that students know and understand writing process, I want to offer you what we do at Keys to Literacy. So we have the process writing routine, TPWR, Think, Plan, Write, Revise. And the idea here is that what we want students to know is good writers move through this process, what we call recursively. And that's what this big red arrow is meant to represent, which means to say you don't only think, then you only plan, excuse me, then you only write, then you only revise. No. If you're like me, you sit down at your keyboard and you start typing an email, type, and then you go, delete, 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 delete. That's not how I want to say it. And then you try to type it again, right? And so we want students to know that good writers do move through this process, and they're always thinking about what is the message they're trying to get to their audience and what's the best way to get that message to them. We use this in the our Keys to Early Writing, which is K2. How do we move through writing process? What kinds of questions do we ask ourselves, right? So when we're thinking and planning, we ask ourselves, what is it I want to say, right? How will I present what it is that I'm going to say? How can I use drawings, words, a combination, sentences, right, to get those ideas out to my reader? And then when it comes to revision, this is so critical. Whatever work you can do, kindergarten, first, second grade, to be about to make it stronger, to add more detail, to add more information, so my reader really understands what it is that I'm trying to say, and less about the errors that I'm making. It's really important that we pay attention to spelling and sentence construction. Those matter, but they come at the very end because we want to revise for our content, make sure what we're trying to say is coming across clear. Then once that's done, we edit for our conventions, right? And we want to make sure that we don't have errors that get in the way of someone understanding what it is that we're trying to get across to them. Okay, I want to share with you one quick tip of how you might be able to do this effectively in your classroom. So this is a practice that helps students move through the writing process in 1 week. Because one of the things that teachers often say is, takes us so long to get through the whole writing process, right? So I want to teach this to you and offer it as an idea of a way that you can help your students know and understand writing process and what it does for them as writers to help get some buy-in onto why we want to spend time in writing process, okay? So on day one, basically, that's where you go through think and plan. So you say, okay, everybody, we are going to make a list of our favorite, you fill in the blank, musicians, our favorite sport, our favorite, some everyday accessible kind of category of information for them, right? So everybody make your favorite list of whatever that is. And that's it. That's it on day one. That's it. 5 minutes, we're done. Day two, take out your list. Okay, now take 2 minutes and think and plan with the person next to you. You made that big list, narrow it down to the one thing you have the most to say about, okay? So we're providing a little bit of opportunity for collaboration, a little bit of opportunity of oral rehearsal, but we're putting some boundaries on it because we don't have an hour to spend on this, right? Okay, they think about it. You say, all right, so now all you need to do in the next 5 minutes is write one sentence. How many sentences are we going to write? One. If you have time and you want to write more, of course you can. But remember, we're thinking about our reluctant writers and trying to get the foot in the door there for them as well. So everyone needs to write one sentence. Put it away. Day three, they bring it back out again. Okay, now here's what you're going to do. You're going to collaborate with your partner again. Take the time. We're going to actively listen as the partner reads their sentence to us. We're going to offer some feedback. Maybe the feedback is a question that we have, and then you're going to listen as your partner reads you theirs, and you'll do the same thing. So they revise for content. On day four, now they have their sentence done. Now they're going to read it, and they may actually let their partner hold their paper so that they can see if there are some editing pieces. So it might be something to do with spelling or punctuation or capitalization, depending on where you are and what grade level you're working with. And then day five, and then you put it away. Then day five, you take it out, and now they rewrite it, and maybe depending on the grade level, they draw a picture to go along with it, and that is considered published. And so over the course of 5 days, you have shown them the writing process in a way that feels manageable and not overwhelming, and they can understand how what they started with just on Monday has now progressed to a really strong sentence by Friday that they're very proud of and ready to share. Okay? So the big ideas about writing process is that it's not just about finding mistakes, right? It's the moves that good writers go through to make sure that the message that they have to send is coming across to their readers in the clearest way possible. Okay. All right. Next, let's talk about this recommendation number 3. So remember, recommendation number 3 in the elementary guide is about students having fluency. Fluency with the handwriting, spelling, sentence construction, keyboarding, right? Word processing. Here, we're just going to focus on the sentence construction. And in order to do that, I want to just talk about sentences for a minute, and I want to draw your attention to the syntax strand of the writing rope, which includes the grammar and syntactic awareness, sentence elaboration, punctuation. Here's what I will say. We have been collectively in a rush to get our students to paragraph at the elementary level. And in that rush to get them to paragraph, we really haven't spent the time that we needed to on solid sentence construction skills. This time is not going to be wasted, okay? So I really want you to be thinking about that, thinking about the students you work with. Again, this is a big range today. We're from kindergarten to 12th grade thinking about this work. All students benefit from thinking about how to make their sentences even stronger. So there are a couple of resources that I think would be helpful. The Keys to Literacy has their own, we have our own blog and it's free open access for everyone. Joan really does a great job writing these posts. But there are two blog posts, Sentence Structure and Creatively, Sentence Structure Part 2, that I would like to offer to you as ideas. Remember when we started, we talked about how some of you might be in the position of leading faculty meetings or grade level meetings or department meetings. These two blog posts are a great way to kind of get some discussion going around what you're doing in this vertical articulation around sentences, K-5, 6 to 12, whatever bands you happen to be in, and promoting some of that. So when we're thinking about ways to develop kids' syntactic awareness, our goal is to give them multiple opportunities to practice manipulating the different parts of sentences. So in our Keys to Early Writing and Keys to Content Writing training that we have, we go over all of these today because our time is so short. I'm just going to focus on sentence combining, okay? So when we're thinking about sentence combining, what we're thinking about is how can we have our students manipulate shorter, choppier sentences to make more complex, syntactically correct sentences. This work was started in the 1960s and consistently in research is found as one of the most effective practices we can do, K through college level. So everybody benefits from sentence combining, okay? And it is more effective than to do traditional grammar in isolation, because you know what happens when we do the grammar in isolation? No transference into the actual writing that students are doing, or little transference. So this is a way to kind of address that. So if we were going to do a couple of really simple examples here, we would say the book was good, the movie was good. You might say the book and the movie were good. All right. Now, I love this in a pocket chart, or I love it on your Promethean board, some way for kids to actually manipulate Post-it notes, for them to start manipulating. Because what we want to be thinking about is not just what's the right answer, but how do we arrive at these answers? What kind of decisions am I making? And this is where, remember that gradual release of responsibility that we were looking at? The direct, explicit thinking, the think aloud that you can provide for them is really helpful. So we have to ask ourselves, what words must we take with us? The book was good, the movie was good. All right, the book, the movie, and then we have was good, was good. All right, so we can say the book, the movie was good. They might not be able to say to you, we can't do that because we go from singular to plural, but they can hear that we wouldn't say the book and the movie was good, were good. And that means that they have developing syntactic awareness, okay? We can try another one. The girl drank lemonade, the girl was thirsty. You might say, the thirsty girl drank lemonade, right? You might say the girl was thirsty, so she drank lemonade. When we do sentence combining, what we can't do is change the original meaning. So you can't say the girl didn't drink lemonade, right? So we have to stay true to those meanings, but we find ways to pull it together. Now, as this becomes more complex, we can think about the different punctuation that's then brought into this. So the weather was perfect, the girls were playing soccer. Notice what we have here. Now we're adding in a comma. So this is our opportunity to talk with students about, why do we have a comma in this sentence, but we don't have a comma here in this sentence? The other thing that's really nice about sentence combining, it's really nice about sentence combining is you may, like I did, have students who always want to know, Mrs. Klein, excuse me, is this the right answer? Is this the right answer, Mrs. Klein? And what we know is when we're sentence combining, we actually have the ability to combine in different ways as long as they are syntactically correct and they also stay true to the meaning. So there's room for kids to be right in more than one way. And that's also an opportunity to engage more of your students and your reluctant writers through this process. Okay. Now, you can do something like this, and I know it's late in the day, so you're probably pretty tired, but all of these short sentences comes from one big sentence in a middle school textbook. So, what I would ask, could you combine these 7 sentences into one grammatically, syntactically correct? If we had more time, I'd let you try it, but let me show you the real answer is down here. So what we want to think about again is when you're doing this, I want you to think about the benefits of you modeling for your students, right? Thinking about what decisions are you making. I also want you to show them what you do, which is if I were to give you time to do this, you would be rereading these sentences. You would be rereading the sentence that you were trying to build, multiple opportunities for that, right? If you're the science teacher, I want you to think about how wildlands and grazed rangelands and active timberlands, how those are all your vocabulary that you want students to know and understand, and how having the opportunity to repeat those many, many times and practice with them is so beneficial for your students, right? So these sentence combining activities are not just in isolation to practice grammar, it's also helping them understand the vocabulary and the concepts that are associated with whatever you're learning, okay? Now, what we don't want to do is go to Teachers Pay Teachers and go to Teachers Pay Teachers and get some worksheets on sentence combining. That is not helpful for our students. I want you to think about all the content that you have to get through on a daily basis. There's so much. Use that content to develop these sentence combining activities. So here's an example. We use the book called One Tiny Turtle in our training. And here's an example of some sentence combining that's done as a cloze activity. So I want you to see CLOZE, right? And as you're thinking about this activity, I want you to notice how we've provided a word bank. And for those students who struggle with transcription, remember we saw that in that third recommendation that there needs to be automaticity, fluency in transcription. Notice how we're taking away the transcription part of this for the most part. In other words, they are not spontaneously generating the content. They are also not rewriting the sentences. They are simply reading the sentences and deciding which of these words make the most sense when we're trying to combine these ideas. So we're really isolating that skill so that students can show us, do they understand how to sentence combine effectively? And we're not assessing their transcription skills at this moment, right? Because that's not our objective, and we're always leading with our objective. Good. I'll show you a couple at the secondary space, how you might consider scaffolding this. You might say, okay, here's a science example about the water cycle. What we're going to do is I'm going to underline the pieces that you must bring in, okay? And so then they can see, okay, I have to make sure that I don't forget these 2 parts. We can also do something similar to that cloze activity for students here with cueing with keywords, right? And anybody who, several years ago, there was an article in the Atlantic about New Dorp High School, which is a high school in New York. And it is where the foundation work for Writing Revolution actually started. And so what they found was they asked kids across this entire high school, how do you use the word but? How do you use the word and? How do you use the word so? And what they found was the students didn't know the difference. They didn't understand how those words function. And so by focusing on writing at the sentence level, the entire school did this, math, science, social studies, ELA, PE, art, music, everybody. Anyway, that's how they ended up growing their students' proficiency. But it started with what some teachers call the small words, right? How do these words function? Okay, what are some advantages of sentence combining? You can see them here. I want you to think about how if you teach sentence combining and you have your students writing a larger piece, and you know what happens at revision time? It's really hard. Kids are not sure how to revise their work. How concrete and actionable would it be to say, okay, I'd like you to go back into your work, find two of your short, choppy sentences, and see if you can make a nice combination, do some sentence combining. You'll have practiced it. They can then apply it during their revision stage. It is also a way to help them become more skilled in the punctuation, as I said, not in the grammar in isolation, but through the actual writing that they are doing, okay? We know that when you use content that they are studying and learning to build these sentence combining activities, that you are boosting their comprehension, boosting their understanding of the vocabulary that goes along with it, okay? And when we're sentence combining, that point number 5 is really important. It is not on them to generate the content. The content is there. It's about, do they understand the content well enough to be able to combine it effectively into one really strong sentence? Okay. All right. The last piece I want to talk about is creating an engaged community of writers. As we said, when we're thinking about this, it's not just a feel-good principle. The idea here with creating an engaged community of writers is that there's a connection, and that essentially this is a space where I, as the teacher, I make a lot of mistakes when I'm writing. That's how writing goes, right? You are safe to try new things. It's okay. There are opportunities to provide collaboration, to provide feedback in lots of different ways. What the IES guide kind of, excuse me, outlines is that there are lots of components to think about how you build a strong community. I want to actually focus on something we do during our training, which is called writing beliefs. And the idea with writing beliefs is that we say to kids, there are some things that I believe in about writing. Number one, I believe writing matters. And I believe that this is something you're going to use throughout your entire life. We're going to do it in school. You're also going to do it at home. You're going to do it when you get a job. It looks lots of different ways, but writing matters. I also know and understand writing's a process. And so the first time we write something, we're getting our ideas down. We have to go back many, many times through the writing process to really refine and get our message just right. And then finally, I believe that everyone is a writer. Everyone can learn. I can teach you how to build solid sentences, and you can do that in science. You can do it in social studies. You can do it in ELA. You can do it when you go apply for a job. You can do it to write to your grandmother. You can do it in many, many different ways, but everyone can be a writer, okay? So when we share these writing beliefs, here's a district, the Lynn Public Schools in Massachusetts. We work with them. This is their writing beliefs that they use throughout their elementary school. And then here's an example from a high school in New Lexington, Ohio, where they have these writing beliefs up in every single classroom. And the way they came to these was the entire high school faculty sat together and they came to a consensus on what they wanted these writing beliefs to be. These were the most skeptical people when we started that training that were like, what does this have to do with me as high school teacher? And by the end of it, their whole culture had shifted with the idea that they all played a part in helping students gain their proficiency in writing. Okay. All right. 4:54, 6 minutes to spare. What I'm wondering is, would you in the chat think about all that we've covered today, and would you be willing to do an aha or a question or a takeaway or an overall reaction or comment to our session today, thinking about the big battleship of the science of reading and our little dinghy over here of writing. So let's just give everybody a minute in chat. Let's see. I see some friends in the audience, and hello, friends, if I haven't had a chance to say hi to you. Some that I haven't seen for a really long time. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Forgot about sentence combining. Great. I'm glad it was a reminder of a solid practice that you can bring back in. The 5-day writing process is liberating. Yes, and thinking about that K to 12 span, sentence combining. If you can get some conversation going with your colleagues around the critical nature of this and how easy it is to embed it a couple times a week into their instruction, students would really benefit from that. I'm going to stop my share. And does someone from the board want to jump in?
So I'll share mine. I loved the biggest takeaway for me was as a classroom teacher was the task, the audience, and the purpose, because I think that gets so much buy-in for the kids. I love that. So thank you for that.
Great, great, good.
And I
Okay.
don't know, Teresa, do you see any questions in the form at all? I'll look at
I
the
haven't
form.
seen any. I think a couple of us answered the question of someone who had come in a little bit later about the recording, but I don't see anything else. And I think I kept up with the link to the practice guides. If anyone else needs that, if they came in late, I can put those in there again. So there's one for elementary and one for secondary.
Thank you, Teresa.
You're welcome.
Well, Lisa, this was so fantastic. There's so many takeaways. Is there anything else you want to end with before we kind of
Oh,
close?
yes, I do. I want to tell you that there's free resources. Oh, wait, let me just share. And also that we have so free resources at keysliteracy.com. We have our writing conference, $49. Guys, look at the lineup of people who are coming. It is amazing, amazing. $49, you get all of the sessions will be recorded. So if you can't be there, it's all virtual, but if you can't be there, you can get access to that. And it's called Right Now on November 15th. And then I want to be able to give away a free book to 2 lucky members. So if you want to scan this free book and online course, our Keys to Early Writing, Keys to Content Writing, we'll give away one of each of those to somebody who you have to be live. Sorry, recording.
Oh, fantastic.
But if you're here today, so let me leave that up so everybody can scan and enter to win. And you can choose if you like the early writing K2 or the content writing grades 3 through 12. Thanks for the opportunity. And Reading League New Hampshire, you're doing, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Lisa, that I tried to capture notes throughout your whole presentation. I just put them in the chat.
Awesome.
Liz Cannon is really the person who does this really well, but I did the best I could. And if anyone wants to just take go ahead and copy that or download it, it's notes from the whole thing. So thanks so much, Lisa. You are incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to say like a quick shout out to Krista. Thanks for being here, Krista. Good to see you. And Carrie, I haven't seen you in so long. I'm so glad you were able to make it today. Let's stay on for just a second, Carrie, so I can connect with you via email, okay?
And I would just like to close and say thank you for everyone for attending tonight. And if Diane, can you put that last slide for the spotlight? That would be fantastic. Thank you. as that comes up. And a special thanks for Lisa for sharing all of her knowledge. The Reading League would like to invite you to our next event, which will be a spotlight on Northwest Elementary School, and we'll be celebrating their successes of their experience on their literacy journey. This will be held on November 12th at 4. It is a virtual session, so feel free to sign up for that as well. And again, thank you for everyone for coming. And thank you, Lisa, so much. It was fantastic.
Thanks for having me. Keep up the great work here in New Hampshire, everybody. Thank you.
We
Thanks,
appreciate
Lisa.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
it. Bye.
Thank you.